Maybe just a little further introduction. I've been doing this technology alliances thing for a long time, 25 years, give or take. 2 decades at F5 Networks, then a few years at Extreme Networks. While at F5, grew up from being a couple hundred person company to several thousand. And just the nature of that technology, spent a lot of time in the bowels of other and more often than not much bigger tech companies as a result of having aligned interest in going to market together. And so that's where I cut my teeth in this space. Let's jump into it. The overarching premise here is that you're going to hear me say over and over again that I'm sure this is not the case for anybody in the room or anybody online, but I'm sure you'll all nod because you've seen this phenomenon. Technology alliances quite often are a shoot from the hip phenomenon, if you will, and they would be more effective if they actually went through some sort of process. Not necessarily an onerous one, but some thought process. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today. First, though, it's kind of important to ask the question. I like to do Socratic, rhetorical type of presentations. You don't just have technology alliances for the sake of it because you want to keep somebody busy developing pages on the website to show a bunch of logos. Why have technology alliances? Anybody want to throw an answer out? I like that. That's a good one. Another one? I'm sorry? Product. Yeah.
Share best practices, innovation, etc.
Sure, I like that answer too. At the highest level, those are all accurate. At the highest level, it's to help drive the overall corporate objectives. A company exists to achieve an objective. It's usually to drive shareholder value or something. And so you've got an objective. The company develops a strategy to achieve that objective. You organize your resources around that. Alliances is part of that formula. Typically, these are the sorts of things that leadership says they want from alliances. They want to drive top line growth. They want to improve competitive advantage. That's the product piece, or fill product gap. Gain access to markets they might not otherwise have. One that I don't have listed here, though, sometimes it's to fulfill regulatory requirements, speed to market demands that you go and align with somebody else because you don't have time to develop it yourself. These are the things that you're able to identify as a result of aligning a technology alliance program around driving the corporate objectives. And so just kind of stealing my thunder with that previous build. I forgot there were so many builds in this. I don't even know if that's the last. There we go. See, that's the problem with builds. You need to remember where the last bullet is. I'm going to go ahead and build it out. Now, not all technology alliances are the same, right? I have to walk over here a little bit. So if I need to give you a shoulder while I do it, I can chew gum and speak at the same time. Typically, in an alliances organization, like in a channel resale organization, you've got your pyramid of impact, if you will. At the base of the pyramid, the names will change depending on the company. These are the ones that I settled on for this presentation because they're the ones that I've seen more often than not. You've got your broad ecosystem, your certified or registered alliances. Companies that don't have an organized program. This is the web page that just looks like a bunch of logos were vomited up on it, if you will. If it's organized, you have some sort of program where you have available resources, if you will, for companies to be able to find you, self-serve, if you will, and get the joint value out into the market as a result of the program that you've got in place. And then the invisible hand, but you're not really doing any go-to-market necessarily with them because this is your broad ecosystem. You have finite resources. You can only focus on so much. But the invisible hand of the marketplace will tell you, because you're monitoring, because you've got a formal program in place, hey, XYZ Tech or ABC Soft or LMNOP Incorporated is getting a lot of attention. We're getting a lot of clicks. We're getting a lot of phone calls. We're getting a lot of tech support calls. TSANet is telling us that this is getting used a lot. et cetera. Let's shine a light on that, and I'll come back to that in a process perspective. It might graduate into the thick middle part of the tier, your solutions alliances. This is typically where you have a meeting of equals, not always, but equal-ish, if you will, where you've looked at one another. Hey, me and you have an aligned interest. You get this, I get that. Let's hold hands and run down the beach together and go sell a lot of product, more product as a result of working with one another. You do joint go-to-market, et cetera. We'll talk about that as well. And then at the tip of the pyramid, you've got your marquee. These are your rainmakers, if you will. They're often, not always, but more often than not, much bigger than you, if you will. These are these are the cash cows, if you will. And it's shaped like a pyramid because as you go up the pyramid, you have fewer and fewer of them. You may only have one, a couple marquees. You'll have a handful of solutions and almost an unlimited number here at the base. I use a pyramid because that's what I can draw, but it's really more, it looks more like a sorcerer's hat, if you will, where it's much broader at the bottom and then peaks out at the top. I think this is pretty straightforward. I don't think I'm getting into rocket science here, but any questions before I move on? Okay. You're giving me 40 minutes. This reminds me of a former CEO that I had, where if you had an hour with him, you knew you had to get out of there in 40 minutes. If you had 30 minutes, you knew you were supposed to be done in 15. So I may be using the John McAdam mode here and being done faster than 40 minutes. We'll see what happens. Whenever somebody does that, by the way, they say they're not going to use up all their time. They use 15% more than the time that they've been allotted. So let's see what happens. All right. So there we go. So I talked about that phenomenon that is shooting from the hip in the world of technology alliances, a lack of process. That was certainly the case for me much of my career when F5 was a tiny company. You could get away with kind of making stuff up on the fly, but by the time we started approaching $1 billion in revenue and having many more people than just a couple hundred in the company, it stopped working. It wasn't as efficient, and it took a while for me to recognize that, by the way. And what happens quite often, I need to walk over here for a second, but folks online, I apologize. If you have an NPI-like process for alliances, which makes sense, you have NPI, new product introduction for product, you're taking something to market that's going to impact corporate objectives. So you have a process. Alliances should do the same thing. Why not have an NPI-like process for alliances? Because I want to be different, I said a lot of 4-letter acronym instead of a 3-letter acronym. I, P, E, and R. I like to have the ampersand between E and the R because otherwise hyper rhymes with diaper. I didn't like that, but I, P, E, and R forces me to actually say the letters. So you got the initiative, the proposal, the plan, execution, and review. I'm going to go through all of these. But what typically happens, actually, this is good question. If you were to venture a guess, where do you think most alliance efforts start? The super majority. Where does the day one action start? Anybody? Execution. Yeah. They jump right to execution. And let's make fun of a CEO. CEO wakes up in the morning, has an idea, or maybe has a conversation with another CEO and says, hey, Peter, XYZ Tech, CEO and I just talked. This sounds like a great idea. Get on it. And before you know it, product managers, marketing people, alliance leadership, et cetera, they just jump right into execution. And it's a rope pushing exercise. And because it's not planned out and thoughtful, they kind of do I almost use foul language, a halfway job of reviewing assessment. They just will say, hey, where are the purchase orders? Where are all the purchase orders? We're supposed to be making revenue. We're supposed to be advancing this corporate objective. It's probably revenue. It's not happening. This alliance failed miserably. And my response when somebody says that, it's not always a CEO, it's some leader. Well, how do you know? How do you know it failed? I mean, I think it was the 6th grade that I learned the scientific method. So a while ago, gray hairs, I've had it a long time, been around the block a few times, but I still remember it. Scientific method, you've got a theory, you've got a premise, if you will, a hypothesis. You put an experiment together to prove it or disprove it. You run the experiment and then you review it. Maybe it failed, maybe it worked. Or maybe you had some interesting results you weren't expecting and you tweak things. I think you see where this is going. Only then, if you run the experiment, do you know if your hypothesis was correct or not. Alliances overwhelmingly suffer from the phenomenon of not having the process and running the scientific method. How do you know it failed? You know, I see stats, 75% of technology alliances fail. Where are they getting that number? How do they know? A significant percentage do for any number of reasons, but how do you know? So you have to have a process, and Peter, you're absolutely right. They just start right with execution, and they don't really even do this. They just go, it didn't work. Well, how do you know how to review it if you didn't have your plans in place? So let's jump into the first phase, the initiative phase. This is that CEO saying, hey, Peter, I talked to the CEO at XYZ Soft. I think this is a great idea. Okay, let's hash it out. You know, amongst ourselves, just here in the room. This is typically the alliance team, probably the relevant product person, people, if you will. Maybe somebody from sales, maybe somebody from marketing. It depends on what the idea is. We think we have an aligned interest with so-and-so XYZ Tech. This is why we think XYZ Tech would be interested in working with us. This is what they get out of it. That's another step that folks tend to forget. There's another party at the table. They need to get enough out of it to want to be able to hold hands and run down the beach together.
Let's go.
What's that?
I said, let's go.
Let's do it. We have beaches in Washington State. And so you have to assess what that alignment is with the other party, with our own organizational objectives. What's the potential that we can drive? Identify the mutual benefits. That ideation, if you will. That's all we're doing right now. It's ideation. And if it passes our own internal sniff test, this juice looks like it's worth the squeeze because we only have so many resources to pursue so many initiatives. The idea turns into an initiative. The ideation turns into an initiative, and then you move on to the proposal phase. This is where you put pen to paper, virtual pen to paper, if you will, to plot out, okay, to achieve the value of that idea, these are the things that we need to do, and here's how we would go about doing it. Very, very straightforward. You know, what are the success metrics? I tend to skip that quite often with technology alliances because it's kind of a mix of art and science. I used scientific method earlier, but there's a lot of art involved here. People, right? And so what are the success metrics? We tend to think of revenue because we're in business. And it's rare that revenue impact isn't ultimately the ultimate metric, but that's the performance metric. There are a lot of power metrics that get you there, leading indicators that give you confidence that you're actually ultimately going to get to that revenue metric. Do we have executive alignment? If development is required, are we hitting our milestones? Do we have enthusiasm from the fields, from both organizations? Are mutual channel partners excited about this? And are they actually doing the work to get ready? Because if they're not doing the work, they were probably just lying to us and not actually enthusiastic. They were telling us what they thought we wanted to hear. Okay, well, now we're out in market. Are we getting marketing qualified leads? Are those matriculating, turning into sales qualified leads, et cetera? These are the things that you track along the way. Obviously, you have to map out the interactions, the responsibilities, the touch points, have the joint go-to-market plans, et cetera. And then you stage the go, no-go. So we're still just in planning and proposal phase here. And now we're still within mostly within the four walls of our company, with some collaboration with the prospective alliance partner. Do we have a go? Because not every proposal turns into a plan to execute. And it's kind of the reverse pyramid. It's a funnel. We've got more ideas than are worth putting into the proposal phase, and only so many proposals can actually graduate to the plan phase. Okay, finite resources. If you get the go, then you get into the execution mode. Okay. This is where, yes. So you said executive alignment, executive commitment, if you will, and I think you were talking about it in a different way that I'm going to bring it up. There has to be a belief system. There has to be a belief in the value, if you will, because when you throw out revenue or bookings, is probably really the technically more accurate word. Is it causation or correlation, by the way? Because not that many alliances drive pure causation of revenue or bookings, if you will. Now, if you define a marketplace relationship with Azure, for example, and Azure is the seller of record, then that's pretty straightforward. Now, you could argue that's a multifaceted relationship that is an alliance and beyond, if you will. So not many pure technology alliances, which are by definition sell with causation 100%, not that often, but strong correlation, which is why those other metrics that I was talking about are so important. And does leadership actually believe in the value of those? If I can get more MQLs than I would otherwise get, how many more? Okay, it's worth doing. Are they going to be bigger pipeline opportunities than they would otherwise be as a result? Working with XYZ Tech is going to get me 1.5x the booking size than I would get without it. Will it happen more quickly? Yes.
Yes. Well, one of them was a gap in your product. Right? You offer 8 different features that you find a set of customers that want 10. And you find out that if we do this work and this integration together and fund all of it, it's not necessarily that we would make more money, but we unblock deals. So sometimes the win is that there's less deals lost or more deals converted than not. And so at that point, how do you recognize that revenue? You spent X amount of resources and dollars building this integration, putting all this stuff together, and you can't directly track that you had 20% more sales as a result. You can indirectly track that you lost less deals, et cetera. And so then somebody has to figure out, well, how do you decide how many people to fund? How do you grow the scheme? And so the best way I've found to do it, and it's imperfect, it is more art, you said, than science, is some type of attribution. If there are 10 features and you're missing 2, you go get 2 partners to help close those and it works, then you attribute 20% of that revenue or 1% of a percent to say, if our churn rate reduced by 20%, then we're going to do 10% of the overall because we're factoring that way. So it's fuzzy math, but if you can get executive alignment and team alignment on sort of what that outcome is, if people are seeing the right metrics go, then you can attribute and say, well, so much of this money to fund should come from that. And what I've found is they're not giant teams. You have a large product with large gaps. So sometimes you're talking about funding 2 to 5 people. So, on a $100 million number, $1 million of attribution is decent sometimes.
So again, execution, this is where you get to work. And this is where, of course, you spend most of your time. Now, alliances are moments in time. The real world is a messy place. You may have an alliance of consequence with somebody for a year. It might be 10 years. A long time ago, I started joking, alliances are like apartments in grad school. Don't put up art. You're not going to be here forever, right? Don't bother. And that's a little glib. It's a little trite, but they are moments in time. Me against you. Wait a minute. Me and you against that guy. Wait, us 3 against the rest of them. I mean, it's a very dynamic, fluid situation, if you will. But this is where you spend the super majority of your time. It's my least favorite part, by the way. I really like the ideation and the planning and then the review. I always benefited from having a team that did this part, if you will. This is the wake up on Monday morning and plot out, how the rest of the week is going to go, and sprint to the weekend. Pretty straightforward. Okay. I don't think I need to explain execution because that is where people tend to jump to. Where they don't spend enough time is here in review, the honest assessment of how it's going. Spoiler alert, I've never seen it go exactly as it's planned. Never, not once. I've had a few beautiful instances where it went mostly like I thought it was going to go or as it was supposed to go, but it's never gone exactly the way I thought it was going to go. And so that's why this is so important. Depending on the anatomy, the idiosyncrasies of the alliance and your alliance partner, the cadence of review might be monthly, but it's probably not less than quarterly for sure. And also, depending on the nature of the alliance, you do QBRs collaboratively with the appropriate leadership in the room. Might be the CEO, might not be, just depends, if you will. But this is where you gather the feedback. And again, honestly, ask the question, knowing what we know now as a result of having this initiative in market for whatever the period of time is, knowing what we know now, is this exactly how we would do it? When you're honest with yourself in life, really, I probably do this differently, or I do that other thing differently. That's what happens here. And so that's why in that previous slide where I had the pillars, you'll see a cycle back to execution. It really should go all the way back to planning because it's an adjunct to planning, if you will, where you make some tweaks. Do we have the right metrics? Do we have the right expectations? If the expectations are lower but still worth it, do we need to change the resource allocation, et cetera? Or sometimes the beautiful thing, wow, this is working better than we expected. More resources, double down, triple down, if you will. And that does happen. And then sometimes the opposite. Shut it down. Stopping sooner rather than later is a different kind of win, if you will. And that also builds trust with the leadership, where sometimes you have to come back and go, yeah, this wasn't what we thought it was going to be. Let's shut it down. This other one, because we have other motions in play, deserves these resources. Okay. Continue or cease. Pretty straightforward, but I'll ask any questions, any add-on thoughts, personal experiences. I guess let me ask a question. So you have a motion, you have an alliance motion in play, and it's not working. If you're doing this review, you're like, it's not going like we thought it was going to go. Do you still have conviction that it could or should? Or have you come to the realization, wow, this is never going to work? I guess that's an important question for me to ask back. Okay.
Well, I guess you're really in a position where you can't do anything.
Yeah,
So then how do you work through those challenges, understanding that there are new viable options? And then you're not seeing the movement from that alliance partner that you would expect, or that maybe you contractually committed to.
Well, contractual obligations is another thing altogether, because you're lawyering up at that point, which is an unpleasant experience. I've been there. Without knowing more details about the hypothetical that you're bringing up, it sounds like it's coming to an end, and you're better off ripping the Band-Aid off and using those precious resources for something else, which might not even be an alliance effort. It might be for something else, product, et cetera. I've had clients where I've said to them, hey, here's an awesome alliances strategy and plan. This, I think, will work and have impact. But based on what I know after doing my tour and assessment, if I were you, I'd actually use these dollars for product first, right? So, again, I need to know more details, but it's not a slam dunk. Yeah. Sounds like an unpleasant unwinding of a relationship is in the offing there. Okay, so
I think on that note, though, I think you said earlier, QBR, staying in such communication, your question triggered to me years back of an experience with an alliance technology partner that, my lesson learned from it was it became so big, everybody accepted it. And there wasn't proper two-way communication, measurement, et cetera, till it started to break down. And it got to that point you were at, that something's really wrong here, but the lesson learned for me, had you seen it coming, and more QBRs with better communication, better view of KPIs, might have prevented it or got it back on track.
Yeah, there shouldn't be any surprises, that's for sure. Yeah. So, before I transition to the next slide, actually, because it's going to be a tee up for Francois, and that's my way of letting Francois know that it's almost time for her to get ready to start speaking. Finish your coffee. The simplicity of this is not lost on me. This is pretty simple from an idea perspective. But the brutal reality is the super majority of my prospective clients don't actually do it. I've blogged sort of in a very cocky, braggadocious, purposely braggadocious, because that's how you behave in the blogosphere, that before I even walk through the door, I already know what you're doing wrong. 80% of what you're doing wrong. And this, not doing this is one of them. There are other things as well, but this is one of them. And so just sticking to the fundamentals will have a positive impact on the output of prospective and in-motion technology alliances. Now, it's also, though, not lost on me, and this is an epiphany that I had only recently, that I'm doing that thing when I'm talking about this, and I'm doing it purposely for the sake of this presentation. One of those things that sales training tells you not to do, which is to talk about yourself. Me. We do this, we do that, we, us, if you will, but within Technology Alliance, there's somebody on the other side of the table. That's the point of it, right? Again, we're holding hands and going down the beach together. We kind of have to do this now at some point. We've joked about it. And so the notion of the partner journey, what's the journey for the prospective alliance partner? Are we bringing empathy, Technology Alliance partner empathy to the table and in the process? And so that's where our transition is going to be for the rest of the presentation before Paul takes over for the rest of the day. So incorporating partner experience considerations into this IPE&R process is super valuable. It yields trust, okay? And therefore, you actually get that mutual benefit through this emphatic engagement. If you have a better understanding and execution of the partner journey, it ensures that you have that strategic alignment. It takes it to that next step, if you will. Because if it really is me and you against him, or me, you, and him against the rest of them, I need to make sure that I have an emphatic understanding of what that journey is going to be like for you, and likewise you for me, and us for him, and him for us, etc. And so with that, Paul, I think we're going to be transitioning to creating partner journeys. I'm available for questions and chit chat and challenges of my assertions later in the day when we have a break. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay, thanks.